Good morning. This is Sunday in Eastern Carolina. My name is Jeff Diamond. We come to you every Sunday morning, bringing you interesting guests on a variety of interesting topics. And my guest this morning, by way of the telephone from New York and Long Island, is the author William Panzarella. The name of the new book is American Horse. And Mr. Panzarella is with us this morning. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Well, glad to have you on the show. Appreciate Annie Jennings, your PR people, for sending this book. I've picked it up over the last week or so, and it is quite a novel. You're a writer, researcher, advocate for veterans' issues. Where did the idea come for American Horse?
Well, I always wanted to write ground level, very detailed narrative of America from World War II through the 50s and 60s and 70s, but I didn't want to just write a history book. Mm-hmm. So I really wanted you to learn, live through that time through the eyes and life of the main character. So put a person, almost as if you're there going on a journey.
Yeah, and it's interesting that this guy, Frank Keller, who's the main character in this book and going through Pearl Harbor and being a young high school kid. Talk about his transformation from a high school kid and then finally World War II breaking out with Pearl Harbor's attack.
Well, the book starts off with him and his best friend. It's about a month before Pearl Harbor, and they're talking about the Nazis and the war in Europe. Mm-hmm. And you could just imagine that conversation was going on at that time with almost, every kid that age, So they're about to graduate high school, and then after Pearl Harbor, they decide to enlist and join the war effort. So at a very young age, here they are in World War II fighting.
And you mentioned the actual title, American Horse, is mentioned early on in the book. Is that set up as a metaphor, in your opinion?
Yes, it is. Where they go as kids is this horse ranch, American Horse. And as the story goes and as America transforms, there's less and less space, and that ranch has to go the way of apartment complexes and malls. So it is a metaphor for the changing of the country.
And this story really talks about Frank, and he goes off to World War II, or he's on the beaches of Normandy, survives. He sees a lot of friends obviously killed and injured. There's a lot of conflict in this book, isn't there?
There is. There's a lot of conflict, both the world around him and later on his own inner conflict. I think a lot of times when we see movies or read books, there's a hero and there's a villain. But in real life, it's usually not like that. Most people are not, all good or all bad. We're more complex than that. And he really goes through, inner turmoil. So even though it's about the greatest generation, I think what readers will find is that they can relate, no matter what their age or what time they've lived, they can relate to a lot of the things that he goes through.
Mm-hmm. And when he comes back, he starts his business. His dad was, I guess, in the hardware business, and he begins, opening up these hardware stores. He has a son, and then there's another part of this book where the son goes off to Vietnam. Let's talk about that part of the story. Yes,
his son, he's best friends with somebody that also survived World War II. And then both of their sons go off to Vietnam. So there's a lot of turmoil in that, too, which was going on at the time. He also has a daughter, and his daughter is against the war. So he's really torn because he's not for the war either, but he supports the troops, which a lot of people didn't do at the time. So as you can imagine, on the dinner table, there's a lot of family tension. And then he has to live with his son being in Vietnam. And especially him being from World War II, he knows what battle's like. He knows what, his son is going through.
And one of the things in reading about you is that you are an advocate for veterans' issues, and we want to talk about that a little bit. You just mentioned to me earlier you have, I guess, a relative that's being shipped off. Talk about that.
Yes, a nephew of mine is in the Marines. He's going off to Afghanistan, and his brother just returned from Iraq recently. And, right now we talk a lot about withdrawing the troops from Afghanistan, but what many people don't know is we're actually still sending people to Afghanistan.
And the question now, I guess, with these troops being scheduled to come back to the United States, what can we learn from those wars, Vietnam, Desert Storm, about how to treat our troops once they come back?
Well, thank God, I think we as a society have learned our lessons from Vietnam. And what you find now is, even though support of the war effort in in Afghanistan is waning, people are able to differentiate their support or lack of support from the war itself from the people that fight it. So I think by and large now, unlike Vietnam, people vastly support our brave young men and women over there.
And we do get some data as far as, veterans coming back. You've got some young men, 18 to 24. The unemployment rate is high for these veterans. Have you looked into that, why that is the case?
Yes, it's staggeringly high. And I think the case is because, just the economy in general is in very poor shape. And I think because of that, employers are looking for very specific skill sets. If they're hiring you to be a bank teller, they want you to have that experience. Where people that have been deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq, sometimes they've done 4, 5, even more tours, and they may not have that specific experience. But I think employers should understand, one, that because of their military background, they're going to be quicker to learn that skill set, and all the other things that they have to offer to that company in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the book, American Horse, I guess you're teaching the reader maybe some valuable lessons. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I was surprised, in talking to people. I was born in 1970, and even people from my generation, how little, they really know about some of the things that American Horse goes into, like Korea and Cuban Missile Crisis, the Cold War. And I think it's so important to remember our past. It's the old adage, those that do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And even though I believe that anyone in Afghanistan or who fought in Iraq is every bit as courageous and righteous as anyone that came before them in any other generation, I think it is important for us to understand the sacrifices of those that came before us.
You talk about the sacrifice that Frank Keller makes in this book and his relationship with his wife, Mary. This is a staggering amount of years that you talk about this couple as young teenagers on through, when they're in their 50s and 60s. Talk about that a little bit.
It was challenging because this is by far the longest book I have written as far as the time it goes through. It starts right before World War II, and it ends in 1980. So it's really this main character, Frank Keller's, his whole, adult life. And it really it takes you on a journey to what you would experience in that life. And like I said, there's certain things that are unique to his generation. It talks a lot about Vietnam, Korea, civil rights movements, but also he goes through things that a lot of people, would also go through today.
And in fact, in reading about you, you went through a lot as a young man. Talk about your childhood and growing up in Arizona, and you had your own turbulent life. What was that like?
Well, I think, I was really a wild child. I was born in New York, and then I moved out to Arizona when I was 10 years old with my family. And my teenage years was, I think, unfortunately, spent like a lot of people's teenage years just partying, and I just took it to the kind of nth degree, really getting in trouble and not having focus. And then it wasn't really until my early 20s when I really sat down and said, okay, it's time to get serious. It's time to really, assess what's going on. And I had friends that, died or went to jail, and, I said, I certainly don't want that happen to me. There's got to be more, and luckily I was able to pull my life together.
You put together an interesting body of work, including some poetry. Talk a little bit about your website and what our listeners can see when they go there.
Oh, well, the website is williampanzarella.com. It's Panzarella. And it has you can get American Horse there, but also this American Horse is my fourth novel.
Mm-hmm.
So you could also look at my other three novels, purchase them, read what they're about, actually read the preface on the website, and also a book of poetry. And just recently I've also started a blog, and it has a lot to do with what's going on in the world today, and specifically, our troops and how we treat them.
What's the one thing you'd like to share with our audience as far as these veterans now coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan? I interviewed a Navy SEAL last year who wrote a book called The Heart in the Fist. Had some great observations of what it's like over there. What would you like to tell our listeners?
Well, like I said, I think most of your listeners do support the troops. And I think too often in war, we put people in categories of, those killed in action, those wounded, and then everyone else. And we sometimes tend to think that if you weren't physically wounded in action, you come home from war and you're just, you're fine. You get on with your life. But there's, a big transition, especially with those men and women that have fought recently in Afghanistan and Iraq, because they have done so many tours. I mean, we've been in Afghanistan for over 10 years. Mm-hmm. So I think just continue support, symbolic support. I live here in New York, and we have not yet had a parade down the Canyon of Heroes for those that have returned from Iraq. And myself and some others have petitions out there for people to sign, and also give to there's great foundations if you can give to Fallen Heroes Fund or other great foundations as well.
We're talking with William Panzarella. We have a couple minutes left on Sunday in Eastern Carolina. Is it true that you've written a 1,000-plus page autobiography, but you haven't published it yet? Are you waiting for another 1,000 pages?
Yes, that is true. I've actually wrote that before I wrote my last two of the novels, and it's 1,300 pages, and it's just about my time in Arizona. I haven't published it yet because, one, I'm kind of conflicted of, do I really want everyone to know, my life? Because it's really a no-holds-barred account. I mean, I don't hold anything back. And then there's also, how do I go about publishing it? I mean, most books aren't, unless you're talking about Harry Potter or so, most books aren't that long, so it's kind of hard to publish it in the traditional sense. But I'm thinking publishing it within the next year.
Okay. Anything cinematically, anything that you've written being looked at by Hollywood?
Not yet. Hopefully that will come, but I'm glad to write, because when you're writing, you don't have to worry about, if you're making a movie, there's so many other people and moving parts you have to deal with. When you're writing, other than, an editor, which really isn't going to change that much, some punctuation, it's your vision. You're really able to get your vision across on paper. All
right. We appreciate your time this morning. Once again, give us that website for more information on it.
It's William Panzarella, Panzarella.com, and I really appreciate you having me on.
Well, we appreciated our guest today, William Panzarella. The name of the novel is American Horse, and that will do it for this edition of Sunday in Eastern Carolina. My name's Jeff Diamond. We'll talk again next Sunday morning. Have a good day.